All right, we ready?
You ready, Chris? Ready.
I'm ready. Not all of the building is going to look like this, guys. We do have some restored areas, but most of the building is in pretty dilapidated shape. This has been converted into museum rooms. The doors are unlocked. We just keep them shut at night. If you guys want to go in and look at those, you're more than welcome. Before this was museum rooms, this was a general admissions unit, so when people were first admitted to the asylum, this is where they were kept until they knew where they were going to be kept permanently, okay? Now, do you guys want me to tell you, I mean, not paranormal activity per se, but what are the more sketchy areas, in my opinion?
Sure.
Okay, this is one of the wards. It's one of the more sketchy areas. This was the criminally insane ward from 1989 to 1994 when the building closed down. Prior to that, the criminally insane were housed in the forensics building out back. It was shut down in 1989. They were brought back into the main building. This was sectioned off into 3 different compartments. You guys can see how we have 2 sets of doorways in here. The first section, when you first walk in, was intermediate security. The center section here was minimal security. Down on the far end past that door was maximum security. Now, in 1989, we only had 4 maximum security patients at that time, but they did not leave that area of this ward for anything. Our nurses' cubicles, rather than basic nurses' stations, they were enclosed with shatterproof glass. They didn't come into the wards unless absolutely necessary, and they were buzzed in and out. The room here on your right, if you step in there, I mean, you don't have to right now, but later on in the night, you'll notice there are numbers on the up next to the ceiling, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's where our 4 maximum security patients were housed. That's where their beds were. This room that I'm going to take you in was their all-purpose room. This is where they ate dinner. They had their own bathroom. Like I said, they didn't leave this area. They didn't even have like outside privileges. They were the baddest of the bad. The little room that I'm going to take you through going down to lobotomy recovery, this was the visitor center for our maximum security patients. You can see on the floor when you come through here where there used to be a partition wall that separated the visitor from the patient. And the door, the external door you're going to pass on the right, is how we brought visitors in and out. Any questions so far, guys? I know I'm talking like a mile.
When did this place close up?
1994. So here on the right, that's the external door that the visitors would come in and out of. Now we're going to go down through here. We're going to make a big circle. The stairs that you see on your right that are gated in, we're going to come up that direction. So this is just going to go make one big circle. It's the easiest way so you guys can remember how to navigate it. Now this entire area of the building, guys, is sketchy, active. There is nothing above you. We are basically what we call when we get downstairs, it's the sub-levels. But the 4 floors to the rest of the building are not above you when you get to this area. This is all it is in the sub-levels. The reason I say that is in case you hear something above you, there's nobody above you, okay? Now, this area, in the earlier years of operation, you'll notice all the tiled walls, floors. You're going to notice there are a lot of shower areas down here. This is where they house what they call untidy patients. These were patients that didn't have control of their bodily functions, chose not to, refused to bathe. Those types of patients were kept as far away from main operations as possible. All right, guys, so this is lobotomy recovery. So what I'm going to, as I said, this served many purposes, but what I'm going to tell you guys, what we refer to this as is lobotomy recovery. This served that purpose the summer of 1953 when Walter Freeman came through. Anybody familiar with Walter Freeman? Yes. The lobotomist? Okay. Walter Freeman was known as the godfather of the transorbital lobotomy. For those of you who don't know, that is where you go through the corner of the eye socket with an ice pick type instrument. He would tap it through the thin layer of bone with a mallet and do a windshield wiper motion to basically scramble and disconnect the frontal lobe of the brain from the rest of the brain, creating the quote-unquote perfect patient. Everything that makes you, personality, mood, everything is right in the frontal lobe. So when you destroy that, you're basically creating a walking zombie, for lack of a better term. Now this is Ward E. This was general admission for men. So no criminally insane, no violent patients, just a general population area. I will let you know that later on in the night, though, this ward can get very creepy. It's better to check this area out in the later hours, though, okay? So this is Ward B. This was general admission for women. The most common spirit that we talk to in here is Jane. Now, all of our center sections have been restored all the way up to the 4th floor to a different time period. This has been restored to the way it looked in 1897 when it was the doctor's quarters. You can see here they have wrong picture. They
Nice and loud in the picture.
That was before restoration. This is a picture that they found from 1897. They've tried to date it back to that. But back then, the doctors would live on this side. Bedrooms on the back right, living quarters through here. The opposite side was dining, the apothecary, offices, and library space. The room on the far back left was the head physician's office. The room, or the office on the far back right, was the superintendent's office. This was the juvenile males ward. Boys 11 to 17 were housed in here. We have been told by previous staff that worked here when the building was in operation that other than the violent wards, this was one of the most difficult wards to work in. You can imagine mental illness and pubescence and what a combination that is. Very unpredictable patients. Now, one of the tragic incidents that I'll tell you guys about with the side stairs, to give you an idea of how unpredictable this ward could be, we had a nurse who was coming in through those side stairs, unlocking to come in. A patient heard her unlocking, crawled across the floor, crouched down on the side of the door there. When she went to open up, he jumped up, reached around, grabbed her by the back of the head, and started slamming her head off the door. It wasn't even an escape attempt.
Wow.
Just snapped. The bathroom here that you're going to see on the right, this is the story that ties in with the nurse's station. We had 2 boys who'd had an altercation early on in the day. One managed to somehow confiscate a knife from the cafeteria, bring it over with him, followed the other one into the bathroom, stabbed him 17 times in the back. The victim managed to crawl out into the hallway and make his way down to that nurse's station before he bled out and died. Now we have been told by we have one of 2 historians on site, that a worker here at the time that happened told him that that was a butter knife that the patient used. Makes it even more eerie, the blunt force and anger behind a butter knife to cause fatal wounding really sends chills up my spine. The room almost directly across the hall, you'll know it by the, it's right across from the bathroom, but it also has a gold leaf pattern. 2 boys were found hanging together in there one morning. This was in the 70s. This incident over here happened in the 40s. Now, the boys that they found hanging together, we're not sure if it was a murder-suicide, but they think most likely a suicide pact. The boys had been friends and were in together for several years. By the time they were found, they were cold. They had been deceased for quite some time. We do have records stating that we were so understaffed that some wards patients were locked in their rooms and kept there for hours on end, sometimes all night. If we had minimal staff, they were put in the more violent wards to basically keep an eye out so these patients didn't see a nurse or orderly until the morning, which is really sad. I like to point out the scratching in these concrete walls. Sorry, I'm COVID vaccinated. I just got some dust in my throat. These walls are 2.5 feet thick of brick and concrete. Now, I have guests ask me, oh, they did that with their nails. I can't say that. I don't know that. They may have had a pencil or who knows doing that. But now this is the children's ward. I'm so sorry, guys. This tickle will not get out of my throat. Children 5 to 11 were housed here. The boys and girls were not separated at this age. They were all housed together. Now, I won't take you guys all the way down there. It's a dead end. We're going to be backtracking. But this ward was the original criminally insane ward. This housed our criminally insane patients up until 1949. In 1949 is when that forensics building out back was built, and they kept them there from 49 to 89. This is an interesting ward. You definitely want to spend time in here. We had a gentleman who actually was killed in this ward named Edward. He was court ordered here for being basically the town drunk. He was homeless, kind of one of those guys you see sitting on the street corner talking to himself, drinking a beer. That was Edward, and he was put in here with the baddest of the bad. He was ran down in the ward by a man named Curtis and stabbed to death with a homemade shank. That was in 1938, I believe. Now this is Ward 3. This was the male geriatric unit. The first thing people ask me is, geriatrics on the 3rd floor? That makes no sense. This is why that was. We do have a geriatrics unit on the 1st floor, but the 1st floor served for the like the well-behaved patients that weren't a threat, a danger, weren't an escape risk. They had grounds privileges. The more high risk you were, the higher up you were kept. So thinking in this ward, you know, people with like dementia, Alzheimer's, they can get violent. So they were housed higher up. Now the one spirit that we do often contact in here, his name is William Cook. You will get better responses if you call him Billy. I do believe he's on the map downstairs. William Cook was a patient brought here, oh my goodness, it totally, 1897, I believe. His report states that he was very demented, whether that meant dementia or just, they used the term demented a lot in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But it stated that he was very demented, he was very, very emaciated. He was suffering what they called chronic diarrhea, so I don't know if like amoebic dysentery, something like that. But he put himself into one of the bathtubs in the ward, which actually, I should have pointed this out, guys, I'm sorry. The last room in this ward on the right, you'll see that there's a shower in there. It's a shower room, but there weren't showers at that time. He put himself in the bathtub, ran scalding hot water on himself, and burned himself from head to toe. Normally, that may have not been fatal, but because he was so emaciated, it unfortunately killed him. Now the fans that are on in here, guys, our history tours, daytime tours come through these wards, so they keep the fans going to try to keep the temperature down. If you want me to leave those on, I can, but for audio purposes, if you want me to kick them off, I can do that too. It's up to you guys, or you can kick them off. Leave them on? Okay. That's hot. The picture you see here of electroshock therapy is because these two rooms that are actually adjoining is where they administered electroshock therapy. This is Ward C. This was the violent women's ward. When the building was in operation, this was the most feared ward to work in. Even more so feared than the violent men. Violent men were most generally one-on-one confrontational. The women, not so much. They would come at you all at once. So when staff would come through here, they would walk at least 3 people with their arms interlinked or interweaved, and they would just kind of have to herd the women back away from them. There's another demonstration of Walter Freeman doing a transorbital lobotomy. As you can see, Walter Freeman is not wearing any gloves. Now this is Ward F. This was the violent men's ward. Fun fact for you guys that these doors are painted gray to appear metal, but they are in fact wooden doors. I guess they thought that that was going to have an intimidating factor for our violent men. All the violent wards have these flat back doorknobs. This was so they could not hang themselves, injure themselves. They were known to break their own wrists and the wrists of staff on the doorknobs. The first documented murder we have in this ward, and I'm sure there are several more than we have documented. This room right here, it's yellow. We should have a sign, but if you can remember that it's just 2 up from the exit door. At this time, we had 2 patients per room. One of our more notorious murderers of the asylum, named David Mason, he took his roommate, got him down on the ground, pinned his knees to his chest until he stopped breathing, and then he repeatedly kicked him in the face until he drove the bone of his nose up into his brain, thus killing him. Orderlies ran in, grabbed him, pulled him out, and asked him why he did it. He said the man was taking up too much of his oxygen. He was responsible for another murder that I'll tell you about when we get down here. I'll take you guys down our seclusion hallway, but both of both areas go to the same exact spot, okay? This is just the seclusion hallway. In any of the other wards, guys, I should have pointed this out on the other floors, but anytime you see a room, this has tile all the way up. Oh, you can see. If you look in here, you can see that there's a difference in color in the tile. In any of the other wards, when you see one of the most notorious murders that we have documented took place in here. I stress documented. We have on paper 55,000 deaths in the asylum. That's not even the entire 130 years of operation. By the documentation we do have in 3 cemeteries on property, the death count is estimated at least 100,000. So what we have documentation for is minuscule compared to everything that went on in this building. But the murder that took place in here, this was a group seclusion cell. If that sounds like a bad idea, it's because it was a terrible idea. These were basically patients that if they were lashing out and being put into seclusion every single day, they said, heck with it, we're going to house you in seclusion. 3 patients were in here at one time. David Mason, with his accomplice James Woods, ganged up on a 3rd patient named Dean Matheny. Now, Dean did have a childlike mentality, but he was fairly large and would have violent outbursts. He was uncontrollable, so they kept him in the violent men's ward, which is sad. But they felt, so we've been told, that they thought Dean was getting special treatment. He was a nurse favorite, and they were fed up with him. So they tied bed sheets around his neck, threw him up over the sprinkler system that you see there, lifted and lowered him several times until he stopped breathing. They got him down on the ground, thought that they'd killed him, but when he came to and started flailing around, they panicked, they busted apart the bed and beat him to death with the bed. The story that we used to be told about that was that they put the bedpost on his temple and jumped up and down on it until it went through his skull and hit the floor. Very recently, and I'm talking just months ago, we found the actual newspaper articles stating that that is not true, that the bed was broken apart and he was beaten to death. But if you've heard the story about through the temple, not that that's the actual story's any better, but not quite so morbid. It is stated in the documentation that they were screaming for the nurses and told the nurses that ghosts killed their friend, excuse me, so madness at its best. 4th floor. The entire 4th floor, you guys seem like seasoned investigators, so you probably concur with the fact that when you're in a haunted location, it seems to be a rule of thumb that the most active areas of a building are as high up as you can go or as low as you can go. Why that is, I don't know, but every location I've been to seems to prove the same. The entire 4th floor of this building, now the entire building's active, guys, entire thing. But the 4th floor is pretty on point active all the time. The side of the 4th floor that we're on now, make note that it has tiled floors. The southern end that we're going to go to has wooden floors. That's how you'll remember the difference. I will tell you, I'm not going to go into activity, but I will tell you, this ward right here, I know there's a large group of us, so it doesn't really feel intimidating. There is not a single staff member that I know of that will come up here at night by themselves and stay for pretty much any allotted time. It's sketchy. So if you spend some time up here, you might figure out why that is. This was the women's side. Again, you can tell by the pink walls. If I haven't already stated that, that's how you can tell the men from women. You got the pink, the lovely pink, and then the blue. The 2 wards, if you would ask anybody on paranormal staff, our favorite wards to just sit, watch, and listen, this ward and the next ward over, Ward T. Very, very active. I've sat up here, I mean, besides the heat, I've sat up here for hours and hours just watching and listening. Great, and get great evidence up here, guys. Chris Robinson, or we call him Dr. Chris. Dr. Chris was actually a patient, not a doctor, but he was always very well dressed. He was allowed to wear his own clothing. When he was in the common areas, guests would often mistake him for a doctor, and he just started calling himself Dr. Chris. He was not a doctor, he was a patient. But he likes to be called Dr. Chris. He hangs out in that area. This is Ward T. This is our absolute favorite ward for activity. Like I said, it's just as active as on the opposite side of the building. The northern end of the building, all around, seems to be more of like, I don't want to say malevolent, there's nothing malevolent in here,
Just a
but
hot spot.
more negative kind of energy. On the entire northern side of the building, it seems more negative, more just cringe-worthy. Over here, it gets active, but it's not quite so fight or flight instinct kick in, if you know what I mean. I don't know if that's because we've kind of jokingly said maybe the fire, kind of baptized by fire this side of the building, and that side has more residual residue because there was no fire. I don't know. But this room over here, big, you can see that it's a fan favorite. There's cards, cigarettes, change, all kinds of goodies on the floor. We have two gentlemen that we talk to that hang out in there, Frank and Larry. We've been getting the names Frank and Larry in there for years. They like when you talk about playing poker. They like women, dirty jokes. Pretty much, we call them the prankster or the jokesters of the asylum. Again, they're a guest favorite. Another name that we get up here pretty commonly is the name Daniel. We do have documentation of a Daniel Ashcraft, who was a 78-year-old man in here for alcoholism. He managed to somehow get out one of these tiny little windows, try shimmying down the building to escape. Needless to say, Daniel made it a little quicker than he expected and did not survive that fall. One of the other names that we get up here is Jesse. We've been getting that name more so in that bathroom than anywhere else. We did find documentation of a Jesse Albright who died from heart complications in the bathtub on Ward T. This is Ward T. Those are the only two bathtubs up here. So it kind of confirmation for us that that may be who that is, or somebody pretending to be him. I don't know.